Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are joining us from. And I'm going to read out a small passage today before we get started. It is from the book Queelistan, and the chapter is chapter 19, and it goes like this. Every morning, I wake up to a new India, a country where you can open the Times of India on the morning of 17th May 2019 and see a gay couple on the front page advertising the paper's Out and Proud classified section. Inside, an announcement reads, as we approach our 15th year together, we want to thank our families and friends, straight and gay, for being by our side and making us feel like a normal couple. Signed, Dr. Prasad Dandekar, oncologist, and Shripad Ranade, leadership coach. An India in which you can be browsing through Vogue's November 2019 issue at the dentist and see Duti Chand, India's first out lesbian athlete, featured on the cover. An India in which the constable Lalita Salve can rejoin the police force in Maharashtra as Lalit Salve after completing his sex reassignment surgery with the support of the state's chief minister. An India in which Swati Bidhan Barwa is appointed Assam's first transgender Lokpal judge. An India in which Satyashri Sharmila becomes the first transgender lawyer to register with the Bar Council of Tamil Nadu and Puducherry. An Indian in which M. Monisha becomes the first trans person to be appointed to a state secretary of Karnataka, and India in which the state of West Bengal constitutes a trans development board with Manobi Bandyopadhyay, the first transgender principal of a college, as the vice chairman. With that, I just want to say welcome to Dreamers and Unicorn. Hi, and my guest today is none other than Parmesh Shahani. Parmesh, I always think that it's best that the person introduces himself or herself, and of course, I could sort of read it out from the cover of your book. He's the founder of award-winning Godrej India Culture Lab in Mumbai, which sparks conversations about the changing face of contemporary India. You've been part of several places. You hold an MS in Comparative Media Studies from MIT. You've been a TED Senior Fellow, a Yale World Fellow, and a World Economic Forum for Young Global Leader. My God, I'm okay. I'm going to stop reading that because it's giving me a serious inferiority complex. And I just want to congratulate you for this fabulous book that you've written. Guys, if you haven't read it, and you may have read many books, but I just want to let you know, this book is going to certainly, no matter how much you know, will teach you so many things, which is going to leave you stunned and surprised at that there is a different planet which you are not aware of. So guaranteed, recommend reading, check it out.
Thank you, Abhijit,
So,
and
Parmesh,
thank you. Yeah.
it's just so amazing. How do you introduce yourself?
I introduce myself as someone who is a dot connector. I like to connect the dots between things. I introduce myself as someone who has lived in the hyphen for many years. So theory and practice, academia, creativity and business. And in fact, after reading your book, which I absolutely love so much, I introduce myself as a dreamer. I think someone like me who has been trained in the humanities, who has grown up, with the arts and the humanities, but who's trying to make a difference in the business world and trying to talk about things like LGBTQ inclusion. So yeah, I would probably introduce myself as a dreamer who wants to make a better world. And thank you for liking Queelistan. I must say, there are so many coincidences. Both our books came out in September 2020 with the same publisher. And on reading Dreamers and Unicorns, I realized that we both want to create a much better post-pandemic tomorrow in terms of while I'm talking about LGBTQ inclusion, you've really spoken about how leadership can step up and shift culture in general for organizations. So just very, very happy to be here. I've been a fan of you since we were on stage so many years ago at the SHRM conference, where you anchored that wonderful session on LGBTQ inclusion with Lakshmi and me. I remember so clearly how warm, and you were full of empathy at that moment. And this was many years ago when, before the Section 377 judgment.
Yes. Yeah, it's just quite incredible. Yeah. So, I just one sec. I think there's some connection problem that I'm having. Just one sec.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. Hopefully, I'm back. At least yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So yes, I think we connected back. That was probably 2015 when we connected for the SHRM conference, and that's when I met you and Lakshmi. So it was quite incredible for the work that you're doing. I just wanted to sort of get an understanding of this whole concept of change. When you look at the world that you're trying to create, more inclusive world, etc. And I think that, I want to first start by saying that are there some minorities who have it tougher than the other minorities? Would you say that?
I think certainly. I
And
think, I think in our country and in our society, in the world at large, in terms of, if you look at gender, I mean, women have it tougher than men everywhere in the world for sure. But in our country as well, there are, if you are queer, it is very, very difficult compared to being straight. And so even within the queer lexicon, because there's LGBTQIA++, it's an ever expanding, way of understanding gender and sexual identities. And the lexicon has expanded over the years. I would say that gay men have it easier when compared to a lesbian, bisexual, or trans, for sure. And intersex people there's so much ignorance about what it means to be intersex. And intersex people tend to be much ignored. So I think, unfortunately, there is a hierarchy of, even within minorities, of, which are more advantaged and which are less advantaged. And if you look at the inclusion space in general, for example, which is, a space that I've come to work in over the past few years, talking about, women's inclusion is easier than talking about LGBTQ inclusion. Talking about LGBTQ inclusion and perhaps people with disabilities, including PWD within the workforce, might be easier than talking about things like caste, region-based or religion-based inclusion. So I think, there are some things. And then we're not even talking about intersectionality here. What if someone happens to be lesbian, a woman, and Muslim, for example, in the workplace, right? So then you have various levels of marginalization. And, this. So I think, for sure, to answer your question, yeah, there are, privilege comes in all shapes and sizes. And certainly there are people who are more privileged than others, even within minority spaces, for sure.
When you look at this, that's actually a phenomenal way of looking at it. And I'm thinking about, yeah, it's true that perhaps even within the marginalized, there are people who have it better than others. And yes, I mean, there is, unfortunately, that hierarchy even in marginalization. I wanted to really look at that, whole question. When you think about people with disability, I can understand that, when the person comes into the workforce, there's a need to build awareness, and, there's a need to actually have people understand that and talk about that. Now, when it comes to sexuality,
Yeah.
why should the workplace really be concerned about sexuality? Because it's something that we leave behind at home, and then we come into the workplace, and suddenly you have this whole notion that LGBTQ people are looking at inclusion, and to me, I don't understand why should the workplace be talking about it.
So, Abhijit, the thing is, we don't leave our sexuality at home. And that's the thing. We all are a composite of all the various parts of us that make us. And you've written about this in your book as well, about how workplaces need to understand this as well, right? So, I mean, your book is about the emotional workplace. Your book is about a workplace with empathy. Sorry. I've been quite sick. Sorry, I might cough a bit. For all those listening, it's not COVID. Don't worry. I've been like measuring my oximeter literally every hour.
But yeah, I just want to say thanks. Today you've you're running 102 temperature, and you still decided to join in. I just want to say
Not
thanks for
the
that.
Yeah. I wanted you to think I was hot, but not this way. I mean, literally today, I'm like literally like you're talking to a hot person. Um,
Oh gosh,
no.
yeah.
So, right, I think workplaces are places which empower us to flourish. So we all bring ourselves. Straight people bring their heterosexuality to the workplace as well, and you worked at so
How?
many different. How?
How?
Because so when you were working at Wipro, for example, wouldn't you have conversations over lunch with your colleagues where you would say, today my wife did this, or wouldn't you hear them talk about
Sure,
today my
sure.
wife did this, today my child did this? Now they are
Yeah.
bringing the heterosexuality to work in that case, right? But why is it that when a queer person says my partner did this, or today I went, if you're lesbian, I went somewhere with my girlfriend, or today it's this? Why is it that when queer people bring themselves to work, it's considered bringing your sexuality to work? But when straight people do it all the time, it's considered normal. So I think because we grow up in a heteronormative world, and because heterosexual people do this almost without thinking, that right, the world has been designed, created. Certainly, our workplaces have been imagined as heteronormative workplaces, which is why everything from the conversations we have to the policies in so many places to the practices of sending invitations to, I'm sure if you would get an invitation for a partner, I mean, some years ago, not now, people would say Mr. and Mrs. Abhijit Badri, which I think is problematic on many levels. But I think, the way people imagine heteronormativity, and straight people bring sexuality into the workplace all the time. So I think it's not a question of queer people not bringing, it's a question of straight people recognizing that we all bring all ourselves to work. So the question for workplaces should be, how can we create inclusive workplaces where everyone can bring themselves to work and not just some people, because the emotional cost of not bringing yourself to work, right? The emotional cost of say 6 to 10% of the population, which is what LGBTQ people are, hiding certain parts of ourselves while about 90% of the population is not hiding, are quite terrible, right? There's a cost. It's a productivity cost. It's I mean, talent will gravitate to organizations which are more inclusive in this case. So, I mean, there's the cost of not creating these environments is quite terrible on various parameters. So yeah, I hope that makes sense to everyone who's listening.
All
Um,
right. So, we have a bunch of people who are sort of responding, and you can see some of those comments, and here someone says that Queeristan is a must sort of read, and everyone's, thing. Elitism is part of any group, says another user. Sharmishta says clearly, I think I could sit and listen to Parmesh speaking for days on end. Thanks for saying what most of us can't. Pratyusha says that, I so agree, we thrive when we bring our full selves to work. Uh, and here is someone who says, to sound like Freud, sex is a common denominator in human biases. So, yes, I mean, there are lots and lots of people who are listening in. And I am asking you some of these questions, Parmesh, because I would really like to leverage your understanding. You worked in the space as a member who sort of really made this minority, invisible minority, if you will, you
Yeah.
made the invisible minority visible.
Yeah.
Um, is it easier to do if you are part of the minority, or is it better that you do it when you are part of the majority? Who finds it easier, and who should be initiating this change?
Thanks. I think that's a great question. I think for change to actually happen, um, I think everyone who can should speak up for change. But with LGBTQ or other kinds of minorities, I think it's very, very important that the straight majority in this case, um, allies, for example, um, really, really, really stand up, speak up for, and support queer rights. Because as I said earlier, the burden on queer people. First of all, most queer people are not out. Most queer people are, go through very, very difficult times to accept themselves in often very, very challenging circumstances, whether while growing up, in workplaces, so on. So then, to have that burden key, we also now have to like fight for our rights and so on. I think many queer people do, which is why a lot of the changes that have come place in our country over the past 30, 40 years would not have happened without queer people standing up for ourselves. But I think it's very, very important for our straight allies also to recognize that it is as much their responsibility as well. So at Godrej, I can give you my example. Of course, I
Mhm.
spoke up many years ago and said we want to create a queer inclusive Godrej. But the change happened because there were incredible allies, like my boss, Nisa Godrej, who happens to be straight, but who recognized that a queer inclusive Godrej would benefit everyone, queer as well as straight employees. So
So, what has been the benefit to Godrej because they have been queer inclusive? What's the business benefit to Godrej?
So the case for inclusion is very clear, whether it's for Godrej or for any organization, right? First of all, it's a decent thing to do. We should all treat everyone equally, irrespective of these minor things like who some of us choose to love and who some of us don't. But even besides that, it's very clear that being inclusive has great monetary advantages. The economic case is very clear. It's a $5 trillion economy. Globally, it's a $200 billion economy in India. And there's enough data that shows that being inclusive really, really helps make you more money. There's enough data from Deloitte and so many others that says that being inclusive, creating an environment in which you are inclusive, enables you to be 8 times more innovative than other organizations. We're talking about 8x returns. There's enough data that says that being inclusive and speaking up about it really helps you connect. And this is something that you talk about as well in your book, saying that we really have to connect to that next generation of young people who are going to come on board, and whose loyalty we cannot take for granted. So being inclusive really, really enables you to connect with your young employees, with your future customers, by telling them that you care about the same thing that they connect about. So it helps attract much better talent. And of course, from a reputation perspective, so whichever way you look at it, being inclusive makes sense. And we found that at Godrej, right? Because we hire from campus to campus. We've been hiring for over 10 years. Whichever college campus we go to, the one thing that students come to us and tell us about is we're so glad that you're standing up and speaking up for LGBTQ rights. Queer students as well as straight students, queer employees as well as straight employees. So I think
Right.
that's right. So I think so the onus is on everyone. The onus is on allies, which is why I'm glad that you're doing this, right? You could have chosen to have yet another straight person on your podcast, but you chose to create this space to call a queer, out and proud person to talk about things that matter to me. So change has only happened over the years because of queer people fighting for our rights, but also allies. If you look, so many of the judges who've given judgments over the past years, so many of the lawyers who have fought for LGBT rights in our country have been straight. So many allies in so many places have been straight. So I think change comes about when people work together.
Yeah, when the way you explain it, this is one of the things that I, of course, needless to say, I am asking you some of the questions which I have also written about in my book, that it does make complete sense. And being able to understand emotions, I think, this is one of the things that I believe is going to be the next big business opportunity. So in Dreamers and Unicorns, I talk about the fact that is one of the big shifts that we will see. It's because we've long since now we should stop talking about the fact that work is only logic and data and all of that. I mean, your insights don't come from data alone. You
Yeah.
need to observe, you need to look at the human connections, you need to ask why are they doing what they are doing. I think there are a million cases. So yes, of course, I mean, I in some senses I asked a bunch of my friends who are in who have reservations about why queer people should be sort of encouraged or brought into the workplace and brought at par with any other opportunity. When I asked them, what would you say that? So they said that you must speak up for us and ask this question. So my first set of questions is really I'm representing them, and I hope I was able to get the answer. So if you're, watching me, I hope I asked those questions in the exact tone and manner you asked me to. So I was told that somebody should really ask this guy, why should we be talking about this? I mean, have you ever seen a straight man talking about his sexuality in the workplace?
They
Ask
don't
him,
need.
confront him.
I mean, to all those people, if the world was such that 90% of the world was queer and 10% of the world was straight, you would be asking these questions if you were a straight minority.
Yeah, I think so because I think one of my beliefs is. Um, I think one of the pieces I believe is that when you look at the minority, I think the majority actually has to have the first step, even though you said that, yeah, it's both together. But I believe that you do need the allies first in the entire thing. I think you need to have the allies in the majority who drive that change. So that's my hypothesis. But I would love to know from you that if you were to sort of really take up this whole thing of talking about how do you make a workplace inclusive, what really happens when a workplace becomes inclusive. So I'm going to sort of go to that. And I know that in your book, you've done 5 different things that people can do, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. And by the way, what I liked about your book, Parmesh, I didn't get a chance to tell you this. As I was reading the book, I kind of thought that what is it? I mean, because the language is so casual. I am just intrigued as to how people are going to classify this book. Is it because you almost write with that Bambaya Hindi thrown in, and it's very Bollywood driven, and your obsession with Bollywood very clearly shows, you know. So what went into your mind when you decided to use this genre of writing? Because you're making things very difficult for the publishing company to decide: is this fiction? Is it non-fiction? Is it a biography? Is it? And there's so much of deep research, and kudos to you for doing that. But what I liked is, I believe one of the ways in which you drive social change, which you really lived up to, and which is why I kind of think that this is such a powerfully written book, that, people need to sort of really figure out, read it from the point of view of how do you use writing to create opportunities and drive social change. So I think that's one of the things I really liked about your book, by the way. So great stuff. Very, very good. Um, to the question that I wanted to go through, um, when you look at the 5 things that you think companies could be doing, what would those be? Just let's have an overview, and then we can talk about some of them, because I don't know whether we'll have. I'd rather take 1 or 2 of the easiest things to do, and then sort of talk about how can people make the change. I want to do 2 things in the workplace and in their homes. So let's
Yeah.
just do both together. I think it'll be great. So let's get going.
Thanks. But just before that, thank you. And the book was written with great intent in that manner, because the book is not just about queerness; it's also to queer the idea. And I use queer as a verb, as a performative verb, because when you queer something, you kind of show people different ways of being. Right? Queerness is about multiple possibilities. Queerness is about giving a different way of viewing the world. So I wrote the book with great deliberate intent about mixing the very, very personal memoir kind of narratives with data and research. And it's not that different from Dreamers and Unicorns, because I remember there are passages in your book, right, where you are at XIMB, you're walking through the campus, you're seeing a new building which has replaced an old building, and it kind of makes you think about how change is inevitable, but when it happens, there's always wistfulness. So, I mean, I think we both try to do similar stuff. Where I've gone slightly overboard is in the Bollywood and in the language and in the song and dance. So, I think it's very important to write a book, and I think in today's world, when we are writing, we are not just competing with other books and authors. We are competing with Instagram. We are competing with Netflix. So I think our writing has to be interesting. We have to hook people in. We have to use stories. We have to, in a sense, really jazz it up a bit so that our readers remain engrossed. So that's why I wrote the book in a particular way. I wanted to create a very, very fun business book, because business people are not boring. Business people, as you said, I mean, business people have homes, business people do work, business people also want to be told stuff, but I think in an entertaining manner. So that's why I wrote the book in that particular way. I'm so glad you liked it and it's resonated. So there are multiple things that people can do to create inclusive spaces. If there's one overarching formula, I would tell everyone who's listening is walk the talk. Because in today's world, you cannot be inauthentic. So I give a whole comprehensive approach, which is everything from changing your policies and a range of policies that you can change specifically for LGBTQ inclusion. Sorry, to creating culture.
Parmesh,
Can you hear? Hello? Is there a lag?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I lost you in between. Yeah, there is a bit of a lag, and I think I lost you a little bit in between. But yes, what I hear you say is that, because it's a business book, it doesn't have to be boring, and because it is very well researched, like your book clearly is, got tons of judgments, references. It almost, I expect it to become quite like a reference book. When somebody is talking about social change, this just becomes a really powerful reference book. For me, that's what it was. But I also found it eminently readable, and it's fun. I laughed in so many places, and so it was fun to sort of look at that. When you think about driving change, what is the first place to begin? Should it be home or should it be in the workplace, and why?
So I think for us who work in organizations, I think if you can start, I mean, of course, you should begin change at home. But I think the way our homes are framed, our homes, the way we have grown up in our homes, we don't have these conversations in our homes. Like when I grew up, my parents never asked me, what makes you happy? What is love? What is your favorite color? They just told me study and get good marks. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of us grow in homes like this. So I think while homes are places where these things must begin, I think in our context, the workplace becomes more important, because by the time that employee reaches the workplace can become that safe harbor. The workplace can become that space where an organization can tell their employee, yes, you spent your whole life running, giving exams, trying to get in, but now you are here. So let us create the conditions for you to flourish. And in my experience, when you create these conditions in the workplace, people take it back home with them. People are more receptive to saying, okay, if Wipro or Godrej or whoever is offering same-sex partnership benefits, is offering insurance, is the leadership is talking up about LGBTQ rights. It is hiring more and more queer people. These conversations are easier to have back home when you can say, guess what, mom, dad, you know what my company is doing, or guess what, chacha ji, or guess what this, or guess what, right? So I think workplaces become particularly important in our context. We are not like America or other parts of the world with regard to LGBTQ identity I'm talking about. Because in other parts of the world, you grow up, you discover your sexual orientation, you come out at home or in college, and then by the time you enter the workplace, you're kind of sorted. I think in India, people enter the workplace very confused and closeted because they've not had that time, space, or attention to talk about these things. So I think in our context, it's vital that we create inclusive workplaces for our queer employees to accept themselves, for them to flourish, and so that they can become better at themselves, but they can also help the workplace to flourish better. Yeah, and then they take it back home. Yeah.
And what is the first what is the first conversation a leader can have in the workplace? Let's imagine that this is day one where people are deciding to do something about inclusion, and they are deciding to sort of make it queer inclusive place. In which case, what is the first thing they should be looking at? Is it policies or is it having a conversation?
So I think it's a combination of having best-in-class policies accompanied by really, really, really strong leadership signaling from the top, because Indian companies are very hierarchical. If the MD, CEO, senior leaders indicate that this is something that we are committed to, people tend to follow. So I think it's a combination of strong policies, very, very committed leadership signaling, and actually walking the talk, which means not just having policies, but then not hiring queer people, or supporting queer causes, or standing up for queer rights, right? So I think there's not just one thing. That's why I think if you are committing to this, you have to commit that it's going to be a comprehensive approach. We have to. So the first thing that anyone can do is actually set aside a budget for it. So I think if there's one thing that you can do, realize that inclusion is a journey that you will go on. It will take money. Just as you set aside a budget for marketing, just as you set aside a budget for finance, I think the second thing that you can do is recognize that it's not something that belongs only to HR. Most companies put inclusion inside HR for convenience. But if you really want to think about inclusion comprehensively, it should come directly from the managing director and CEO. Because the benefits of inclusion are in HR, in marketing, in product, in sales, in everything, right?
Sure, absolutely.
And I think the third is to really, really say that we are committed to it comprehensively. So of course we will change our policies, but what is the use of good policies if our employees don't know about it? So we have to invest in sensitization and communication. What is the use of policies and communication if we are not hiring the queer people? So we have to actively hire queer people. What is the use of all of this if we are not indicating to the world that this is something that matters to us? So we have to sponsor queer events, queer cultural things, etc. Companies that have succeeded have done a comprehensive approach over the years.
True.
I think Abhijit, I think the one thing that companies should not do is only wake up during Pride Month, put some rainbow filter on your logo, pretend to be inclusive, and then disappear. We don't want that.
I think there's just like when it comes to sustainability, there are a number of companies which greenwash is that a term which is used, and I suspect there is queer washing too, because it just gets you bonus mileage to say that you are very sort of concerned about the people, etc. So yes, I think social change actually demands a lot of action. I have a more practical question, which is that when you think about going to hire queer people, let's say at the campus, how do you do that? Because at the campus, like you just said a little while back, that a lot of people they haven't had that conversation with the families back home. And if they are sort of getting hired, um, would they feel comfortable if you sort of, do you spell it out and say we actively are looking for that? Is that something that you say? What is the right way to go about solving for that particular problem?
So there are multiple ways. When I graduated from MIT and I was being recruited first in America, it was really good that companies would. So MIT has an LGBTQ association, and all the top companies, Bain, BCG, whatever, would come to us. They would reach out to the LGBTQ association, and they would do special like mixers or cocktails for us, and they would say, we're reaching out to you because we want you to come and work with us. We want to assure you that we have a queer inclusive atmosphere. So over the past 5 years, what's been amazing is in many of at least the top B schools in our country, there are LGBTQ associations. So I think it's very, very, if you're a company that's interested, reach out to these LGBTQ associations and come and commit to them that this is something that you want to go on. But I think a more practical way, Abhijit, would be to just indicate in all your posts, in all your communication, either with a small asterisk or when you are going to campus. The way Godrej does it is I go and recruit often. And as part of the thing, I'll just casually say, I happen to be gay myself and I've really enjoyed working at Godrej. So whoever, it doesn't matter if you're queer or straight, we commit that we will treat everyone equally. So I think if you indicate in your communication, in your recruitment, that you are an organization which is going on an inclusion journey, whether someone is out, not out, they will at least have that confidence that as an organization, you are committed to this. So then they are more likely to apply to you and to come on the journey. So I don't think we should, as organizations, force people to come out. I think coming out, whether you're a student or an employee, everyone has their own journey of when they feel comfortable, when they feel safe. But we can signal to our employees, present or potential, that if we are trying very hard to be the kind of place that if you are queer or whenever you want to come out, it will be a safe harbor for you. And that's what a good organization can do. You can signal explicitly or you can signal implicitly, but I think that signaling is important. Yeah.
You have Sharmisha who's asked a fabulous question. I'm going to put it up once again. Her question is that you must have come across bigots in your journey as well, and how did you handle difficult conversations, especially if there is a hierarchy involved? How do you manage that? Because that, I'm sure, was never easy. So how do you do that?
So it's been very, very hard. You're right. I've come across so many bigots. And at least with me, my approach has changed over the years. I'm 45 now. When I was younger, I would be very agitated. I would get very angry. I would either lash out or I would try and, but whatever. I'm just saying over the years, I've kind of, I'm becoming older. Now what I do is I actually try and operate from the point that maybe this person is not a bigot. Maybe this person is just uninformed. So I approach that person with a lot of kindness, and and it's not easy when someone is making bigoted things. I say, look, you've just said this. I hope you understand that, the reality is blah, blah, blah. I'm assuming that you're coming from a position of being uninformed. Let me share with you what the actual context is. And this is something that I've learned over the years. It's a process of calling in, rather than calling out. And I heard this at one of the webinars I've done, right? When you call out something which is very important, like when you call out, for example, if you say something which might be problematic, I can say, Abhijit, that was terrible, blah, blah, blah. Or I can say, Abhijit, maybe you didn't know that this was terrible. Let me tell you what the right thing is. Would you like to be an actor? So over the years, even though it's harder, it takes a lot more out of me. I've practiced more and more. How can you call in? Because the truth is, we need more and more people who understand and who become allies, so that we can all together create a better world. So I just try and do it more productively, although it's not easy, I can tell.
Yeah, and because in some sense, it is the difference between a push model versus a pull model. When you invite people in and say that maybe you are not aware, but when you use a term like this, it's very hurtful to me. And as you say that, that sort of just makes it easier for the person to respond back with empathy, and I think that's really powerful. And I also think that when you look at Hadina also mentioned that when you the way that you signal something can either create an ally who sort of just says, "Oh my God, I mean, that would have been this," or it would have been, it just hardens the stance, and you say that, it just sort of makes more enemies out of the entire thing and doesn't help the social change. So yes, I mean, as Zaid says that, calling in versus calling out, very well said. Um, when you look at this whole journey that you've done, you are still. I don't think it is done because it's still work in progress. I see it like that. What is there an end goal that we are looking towards, and is that something? Where do you see this going eventually, and what does that accomplish? What is the final closing scene of the movie, if I were to use your Bollywood metaphor? You're just so fond of Bollywood, so am I. So which is
Yeah.
why I guess it sort of instantly related to this style of writing. But yeah, what would you say?
So personally, I would very much, I would like all the top 500 companies in India to have LGBTQ inclusive policies and practices. This is my personal goal. I'm working with as many as I can right now in any capacity to help push for change, because I really believe that there are multiple levers to create social change, and businesses, the corporate world are very much is a very powerful lever. So I think I would really like to create, help empower more and more companies, uh, create conducive workplaces so that more queer people are hired, more queer people flourish, more queer people are empowered, and we create a better society. But this is just in my personal thing for the business world. I think for our country at large, it's very clear that there are many more legal changes that are needed. For example, we need an anti-discrimination bill. We don't have any anti-discrimination laws in our country. The Trans Act that came out recently really needs to be modified to really reflect the aspirations and needs of our trans community. And I think while Section 377 went away, which decriminalized us, we are a long way from equality. So I think whether it's marriage equality or other kinds, we certainly need that, right? Because I'm a tax-paying, honest, patriotic citizen of my country. I find it extremely unfair why I should have lesser rights than other people simply because of a minor detail of who I choose to love. I think it's really unfair. So what I would like to see is also legal change that puts me and my LGBT community on par with everyone else. So I would like to see a society in which we all have the same legal rights, which are our rights that our constitution anyway gives us. I would like to see our society to reflect that in the law. I think workplaces can be an important lever in that, which is why I do the work I do. But also others. I would like to see families not pressurizing their queer kids to either act differently or to marry people of their who their parents say, even though so many families know very well that their children are queer, they force them into marriages, which leads to terrible consequences. So I would like to see a better society in which queer people are honored, are validated, are accepted. So that happy ending is when we have an India in which all our 6 to 10% LGBTQ people are safe and accepted at homes, in schools, in colleges, and workplaces. And it's not impossible, because if you see other parts of the world, in 40 or 50 years, in one generation, countries have made this change. So
Sure.
it's not impossible.
And I also think that, the way you described it, actually the equivalent of the workplace, where you talked about creating a policy, but also driving the communication and having role models. I sort of see the parallel happening also at a country level, that you need the law, you
Yeah.
also need to have the role models, and also in many ways to create forums for dialogue, because effectively the first step in my view of any social change is really to create dialogue and then build it from there. Whatever is the change that, and especially when it comes to, I think of the many fights that societies go through in every generation. If you go through, there is always a scenario in which you are a minority, and there is always a scenario in which you are a majority. Yeah, all of us are in some senses, whether it's so there's an equal amount of thing, let's say, pertaining to people who speak in a certain way. Yeah. And we are a strange country where when if you speak English poorly, people feel embarrassed. But when you speak Hindi or your mother tongue poorly, or you say I don't know how to read or write that, we say it with great pride. So I think there are many places where, the majority minority combination actually is a great perspective to have through. Naina Prabhu actually has another interesting suggestion, that it should be built into all the, management development programs, leadership development perspective, because how do you become more inclusive in your language, in your policies, and in all the changes that you are doing? Because today, one of the big differences, as I see, in the role of the leader is that leaders are actually working as part of an ecosystem. So that, I think, is the big. Would you say so? That is it part of a change to change the ecosystem, not just the pond where you are swimming.
I think completely. And I think if our B schools all add programs on diversity and inclusion, it's going to make a big difference. So I think that's a great, I think, and if I hope people from different B schools are listening, if you can just add a module on DNI, why it's important, the DNI ecosystem in our country, the benefits of it, and how you can be a change agent. I think it's going to make a big, big, big difference. I think I think, sorry, it would be really remiss if management students today are not learning about sustainability, are not learning about inclusion, are not learning about empathy. Because to me, like, having more empathy, communicating better, understanding the power of inclusion, recognizing, as you said, that we're all connected in this ecosystem, planet, people, everything.
Yeah,
So
sure,
if
sure.
our if our educational institutions can, from the beginning train people about this, it's going to be huge. So I think it's a great opportunity for business schools, like so many in other parts of the world are already doing it. I think it's a great opportunity for Indian business schools to make sure that this is absolutely, it's a compulsory module that everyone needs to actually, take.
And I also think that one of the most powerful ways in which any kind of awareness building happens, so wherever there is inequality, and in law there are many scenarios. I mean, the whether it is by gender, male female, as you said, the whole hierarchy that you talk about. Hierarchy is one of hierarchy by definition happens when there is inequality, boss subordinate, tenant landlord, there are many such examples. And in every place where we ourselves are a minority, I think we would like to sort of be included, we would like to sort of be heard. We don't want our voices to be shut out. And yet, the moment we get into the majority, sometimes unknowingly, and I'm not saying that everyone's doing it because of that. It's also that just building that sensitivity, I think, is a very important way in which you build a world where it is okay to have a conversation about something which you have a bias against, and it could be anything. It could be bias against, let us say, a certain kind of educational qualification. Even now, I know that there are plenty of organizations where they use terms like this is a tier one college, this is a tier two college, and I think it's ridiculous because there are enough examples and more of the world having leaders who've come from zero tier colleges. They haven't even gone to colleges, and whether it is leaders of countries or whether it is leaders of organizations. So there is no reason for us to hold on to these fairly archaic notions. Where did you go to college? And that sort of, in your case, of course, you tick all the boxes because you've got a TED fellowship and this and that. Does that make things easier for you, or does it make it more difficult?
I think in my case, I've been incredibly privileged. So I recognize that my going to a bunch of places is not necessarily an indication of some smartness or whatever, but just structural inequalities that made me grab opportunities in a way that perhaps others could not. So I recognize that very, very well. Have I been able to use these networks to push for change? Certainly. If I hadn't gone to a place like MIT, I doubt that companies like Mahindra or Godrej would have considered hiring me, even though I might have been very, very smart or presented myself well. Unfortunately, these are the filters that many companies look for. But I've become extremely conscious of this privilege. And over the years, I've tried, like you just said, to actually use my platforms to talk about the fact that this is not fair and we really need to be creating a better way of doing things. But have these spaces helped me? Undoubtedly. Have I used the platforms myself to, and in Kyrgyzstan, I talk about this phrase called jugaad resistance, which talks about infiltrating the system almost like a sleeper cell and like try and create change from within. So have I used the network to infiltrate and try and create a better world? Certainly. And that is my plea to everyone out there. Don't think that to be a change maker, you only need to be fighting in the courts or to be an activist, protesting for very, very important issues, or to be in the government where you control policies. You can be a change maker being in the corporate world, sitting where you are, recognizing that the world is full of structural inequality and that you can have a role, however small it might be, to help create a better world. So use your power, use your privilege, use your position. If you feel you have privilege, you must also use it to create a better world for those who don't. That's what I constantly try and do. And I hope that people who are listening do the same, because that's the only way we're going to get to a more equal world.
Yeah, and in some sense, even the conversation like this is just a small attempt at sort of bringing some of these conversations to a larger audience. Because that's the only way, because for me, one of the things that you said was so powerful, which is we assume good intent. And if you do that, you automatically start to say that, okay, maybe you didn't think about it like that. And sometimes to ask the question, which is bothering you, you should ask the question. So I got a text message which wanted me to ask, why do you write he/him next to your name? What is that?
So great. Yeah, so I think in today's world, more and more people are sharing their pronouns. So for me, sorry, he, him are my pronouns. And a lot of people choose to share their gender identity with others. So someone might choose to say she or her. Many people who are non-binary, which means that they don't want to place themselves in either end of the spectrum, might use they, them. The Hindi equivalent would be aap, like they, them is aap. So I use this to indicate my pronouns. And all over the world, many people are using this to share with others how they want to be addressed. So that if someone wants to address us, they address us by the gender that we prefer. So that's why I use he, him. And it's not just queer people, everyone. Straight people are also using this to just indicate to the world that these are my pronouns. This is the gender that I want to that I would like to be addressed as. So it's just something which is becoming more and more prevalent all over the world, and this is just an indication of that. But thank you for asking.
And also, I think it is a little bit like what I saw LinkedIn doing was LinkedIn now allows you to do a small recording of the way you like your name to be pronounced. So some people who have the identical spelling as me might say Obijit. Like the Bengali pronunciation in my mother tongue would be Obijit, but I prefer to be called Abhijit, and because if you don't say that, somebody might be mispronouncing it as Abhijit,
Yeah.
which used to happen in some places where I've lived and worked. So, did you also go through that? How was
Yeah.
your name mispronounced?
Well, I mean, at least in America, whatever, like Parmesh is hard. It's more Parmesh, or like I think it's the mesh that people
Huh.
get.
So
Uh,
people sort of make a short form called mesh.
yeah, no,
As
yeah. I think the mesh is harder for people. So yeah, I
yeah,
think
yeah,
in this world, I mean, that's the thing, right? If we just, and it's the most basic form of respect. I mean, if you just share with people, this is how I like to be called.
right.
Not rocket science. And I think even for those listening, I think it's very important that we understand that Abhijit and me are talking about this because, in a sense, also being inclusive is very much part of our Indian culture. And I write this all the time, and I think it's important. So many people also tell me that you're talking about this, for example, pronouns, LGBTQ. These are all like Western concepts. And I have to remind them that actually, no, these are deeply local and Indian concepts. In fact, inclusion is an Indian concept that then went to the world. And we are now, in a sense, talking about it now because we had so many years of British rule. And the colonial project was also very much at making us feel uh, conscious of or criminalizing some of the most beautiful things that we had.
Yeah,
So the
I agree
criminalize,
that.
yeah, so LGBTQ individuals and acts were criminalized by the British. The same way as they created a Criminal Tribes Act, because the British just criminalized anything that they did not know or understand. Whereas we, for years, have been inclusive. So inclusion is a very fundamentally Indian or subcontinental concept, and we have been having it for years in our part of the world. We include and respect everyone. We call people what they want to be called. So these are all deeply fundamentally Indian concepts that we now
Yeah,
need to
and
be reminded about.
if you look at the diversity of India in terms of whether everything from the sari is worn in so many different ways. There are some 70
Yeah,
ways in which people make tea. Chai, which is so integral to our life, or any dish that you think of, a biryani. I mean, think of the number of variations of biryani that you have. I mean, there are some names which are given, but there are many, many variations.
of course.
So we are a very diverse country, and I think that's the power that we should be celebrating. Also in the language, I mean, Hindi, you would say aap or tum, depending on what the person is comfortable with saying. Tumi or apni, as all of that.
Yeah.
Um, Parmesh, I just want to end. We are coming up to the hour, and I just want to say that in 2015, when I first met you and we spoke about inclusion in the SHRM, conference, I was actually struck by two things. One, I think I was struck by the courage of SHRM to bring Lakshmi and you to the stage and sort of have that conversation. I don't remember any other conference where it has been brought out at that degree of comfort, and it was sort of. I felt very privileged that I got a chance to sort of be there on stage and sort of talk about it. But I also thought that it gave me an opportunity to get to know you, and it's brilliant that both the books have happened at the same time. So I think there is a little bit of that connection there.
Yeah.
I want to thank you on behalf of the whole listeners group and everyone. And I also want to sort of say that I think when you think about the little things that you mentioned, it was very, very enlightening for me. And I hope I've been able to sort of also represent the questions that have come to me from all of you. Thank you very much, everyone who's shared the questions, everyone who's written in, and your encouragement and the comments. May I just request you to share this particular recording with your friends, and hopefully it should provide that conversation. There's some portions of this, because of the spotty internet connection, it's something that I grapple with every time. There have been
Yeah.
times when I've done this, in one of the places where I was speaking, power went off. And so, one of the, so I was speaking like it was like some very fancy lighting. It was just a laptop light which was seeing it through. But at the end of the day, I also want to say that all of us make a far more inclusive society. And this is the book that I just think it's required reading. Oh gosh, thank you. No, you don't have to do that, but thank you so very much. I just love the book. So do read it. And I think I'm going to really look forward to continuing this conversation online as well, with everybody who's there. Thanks a million for being there, Parmesh. Good luck with your journey and stay connected. Look forward to that. Thank you so much.